Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this EMHF seminar on the practical administration of racing and breeding, which is kindly hosted by Weatherby's. I haven't been able to meet all of you last night, but those who I haven't met, I'm Paul Kahn, and I'll be guiding you through the seminar over the next couple of days. I hope your accommodation was okay last night. If you learn nothing else on your visit here to England, you will know where it is that the world ends. And I think your colleagues back home might be surprised to learn that it's about halfway between Wellingborough and Northampton. If you could remember, please, at least to turn your phones to silent and maybe turn them off, and then if you do have to take a call or send a text or an email, perhaps you could leave the room to do that out of courtesy to your fellow delegates and the speakers. I thought I'd start by explaining a little bit about where we are, who our hosts, Weatherby's, are, and their relationship with the British Horse Racing Authority, and then summarise what we've planned for you over these 2 days. So we're in the headquarters of the Weatherby's group of companies. I'm sorry we couldn't have found you a bigger room. Weatherby's is a firm with a very long history, going right back to 1770. It's a private company, and for nearly 250 years there has always been a member of the Weatherby's family at the helm. So today, its chairman is Johnny Weatherby, on the left, who's also chairman of Ascot Racecourse and is our Queen's representative. And his younger brother, Roger Weatherby, who's on the right, runs Weatherby's Bank. And Roger is also the senior steward of the Jockey Club, although I should explain that our Jockey Club is no longer involved in racing administration as it used to be. And back in 1770, when the Jockey Club were in the process of codifying racing on Newmarket Heath, which is about an hour from here, it was Johnny and Roger's 7th generation ancestor, James Weatherby, you can see the generations there, who was engaged by the Jockey Club to act as its secretary. As you probably know, in those days, races were match races. There were only 2 horses in them. The horses were ridden by their owners. The owners were the jockeys, hence the Jockey Club. The races tend to be to a particular steeple or some other feature, hence steeplechase. And there tended to be enormous amounts of money at stake that each would put up. And James used to offer to hold the stake money, the purse, until the race was run, and then to hand the victorious owner both of the stakes. And he was engaged as not only the secretary, but also the stakeholder, and that rather archaic title is one that Weatherby still holds today. Weatherby's are stakeholders now to the British Horse Racing Authority. And it was James's nephew, who was also, rather confusingly, called James Weatherby, who was noting the pedigrees of the horses that were competing on the Heath, and in 1791 published the first volume of the General Stud Book. Ever since then, Weatherby's has had at its core these twin pillars of racing administration and breeding administration. And today, Weatherby's is involved in the administration of breeding in both Britain and Ireland, and in the administration of racing in Britain alone. As far as breeding is concerned, it's the registration authority for thoroughbreds in Britain and Ireland, and Weatherby's also chairs the International Stud Book Committee. Much of the first day today will cover the activities of the Stud Book Department. As for racing, Weatherby's provides administrative services under a contract to the British Horse Racing Authority. Before that, it was with the British Horse Racing Board, and before that again with the Jockey Club when they were involved in racing administration. For much of Weatherby's history, they were based in London, but in the mid-1960s, they moved up to this town, Wellingborough, to a different site, and in 1970 to this building. For a further 20 years or so, though, they continued to employ virtually all of the people who were working in London for the Jockey Club. It was actually Weatherby's who employed them, and employed the people who worked as officials on the racecourses, people like starters, steward secretaries and so on. That's no longer the case. These days, the only people who are employed by Weatherby's on the racing side are those that work here in the building, and there are about 60 of them working in the racing department. The current contract that we have with the British Horse Racing Authority runs until 2020, and much of tomorrow will concentrate on the racing administration activities. These traditional roles of racing and breeding administration today account for only a minority, still a very important part, but only a minority of Weatherby's total work, perhaps a quarter of it. And this slide shows the total workforce. There are over 350 people employed by the company, great majority here in this building, but Weatherby's also has offices in Ireland and in other parts of Britain, like London and Newmarket and Swindon, and one person in Riyadh, because Weatherby's handles the stud book for Saudi Arabia. It has a turnover of around £40 million. Weatherby's has a bank, an insurance agency, an asset finance business. It produces race cards commercially for nearly all the race courses in the country. It researches and compiles sales catalogues for all the major sales companies in Britain and Ireland, and even further afield in Germany. It has a wide-ranging commercial services department providing services to race courses and to trainers and so on. It registers other horse breeds besides thoroughbreds. It's involved in DNA testing of cattle, etc., etc. The list goes on. We won't be looking at those areas except where they have a direct impact on racing or breeding administration, like some aspects of the bank. But we will walk you around the building so that you get an idea of the total scale. So, to the seminar program. We start with an overview of the governance of breeding. How does the International Stud Book Committee work? What is the relationship between an individual stud book, in this case the General Stud Book, and that body? What's the relationship with the breeders, with other stud books, with racing authorities? And Paul Greaves, who's Vice Chairman of the International Stud Book Committee, will talk about this. And we then move on to an overview of the governance of racing. Again, taking Great Britain as our example, how does a racing authority work? What are its responsibilities, constraints, priorities? The BHA is the governing authority for horse racing in Great Britain, and it's responsible, therefore, for setting policy, for regulating the industry, licensing the participants, and writing the rules, and disciplining those who fall foul of the rules, and for the fixture list. It's not all-powerful. In Britain, the race courses and the horsemen, the owners and trainers, hold power also in ways which Adam Brickell, who's the BHA's Director of Integrity, Legal and Risk, will, I'm sure, touch upon. Then after coffee, we'll move to another room where we will be for the rest of the seminar, and I'll give a brief outline of the key ingredients for a racing and breeding database, which is essential in modern day administration. And the rest of the day is then given over to the detail of stud book administration. Tomorrow, as I say, we'll cover racing, and to finish tomorrow afternoon, we'll look at the international dimension to racing administration. I'll explain how the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities, the IFHA, and the European and Mediterranean Horse Racing Federation, EMHF, how they work. Talk about the international agreement on breeding, racing, and wagering, and consider other international influences such as the European Union. So then it will be over to you to raise anything that you want to talk about, any problems you have in international racing, any questions about whatever you've heard over the 2 days. So I hope you find the seminar both useful and interesting. So let's make a start, and our first speaker is Paul Breeze.